Hey everyone, happy Sunday. Welcome, and thank you for joining me in the session. Um, as always, I am honored to be with you here in this time of sensitivity and uncertainty and deep transformation. And I look forward to sharing time with you here in our shared sacred space today. So the things we'll do here today in our time together is number one, in a few moments, we will go ahead and actually do the process of setting sacred space. And then we'll have our topic for our monthly session. And the topic for this month will be how to recover from failures in life. How to recover from failures in life. We'll have a story and conversation related to that. And then we will have an exercise. And then we'll close our sacred space. Before I open sacred space, I just want to do a little housekeeping announcement that we still do have spots open in our upcoming Bali retreat, March 3rd to the 9th in Bali, Indonesia. Let me know if you're interested. If you can't make Bali for any reason, schedule, logistics, location, we are currently in the process of planning out a bit of a retreat calendar, both online and in person, for the rest of the year. So there are things we may do over the summer, 3-day retreats, 7-day retreats on different topics, body healing, money, wound healing, all kinds of things. And then another retreat possibly in the fall. The dates, the locations, and the topics are all kind of up for grabs right now. So if you know there's something you would like to do together this year, and you would like to influence the dates, the locations, or the topics, shoot us an email and let us know what you're thinking. And if you're like, okay, I can't do any traveling this year, but I'd be interested in doing online retreats, like online cohorts. If there's a time frame and a topic you'd be interested in, let us know that too. Anyway, the point is, whatever you're interested in, now in the next week or two, now is the time to speak up, because we're like setting the calendar, setting the schedule, and yeah, just let us know. Only if you want. Only if you want. Okay. So with that out of the way, let's start the process of setting our sacred space together. So what we would like to do when we set sacred space is we would like to together create a space which is devoid of fear, threat, and control, in order for us to open to higher guidance from within our own selves. Higher guidance, however you define it. It could be a muse that you consult, spirit guide, or just intuition, instinct, random flashes of insight that come to you in the shower. But in order to hear this voice and guidance within you, you need to feel safe, right? So we want to create a safe sanctuary space for all of us to be able to relax and have this feeling of surrender with no feeling of danger or threat. So that we can take these kinds of guidances and downloads and effectively so that we can partake of the nourishment, the emotional nourishment and the spiritual nourishment that comes from being in sacred space together as a group. And in opening sacred space today, I will propose, as I always do, that we all follow the 4 principles of proceeding in sacred space. Number 1, confidentiality, standard Vegas rules. You know, what happens in sacred space stays in sacred space. Now, that's the rule when we're in person, in our in-person retreats around the world. Here, since we're online, the stream is public, the replay will be public. So the way we handle that here is via anonymization. So if you would like to be anonymous, you don't have to be anonymous. But if you would like to be, you would come into the Crowdcast version of the stream, go into edit profile, and then change your username to Mickey Mouse, Harry Potter, what have you. And then continue chatting, talking. So that's number 1. Number 2 is that in creating sacred space, as much as possible to the best of our ability, we want to try and refrain from creating any feeling of threat or controlling in our interactions, in other people. But also we want to refrain from doing that to our own selves, right? The safety goes all around in all directions. And that obviously includes anything that's like maliciously intended, but also when it's well-meaning, right? So even if it's like fixing or tough love or intervention, where it's like, this is good for you, this is gonna hurt me more than it hurts you, but this is good for you. We don't even do that, not because it's bad essentially, but because when we're in sacred space, we're trying to get away from the provenance of fear, threat, and control, regardless of the intention. So we refrain from that in order to preserve the energy of the sacred space. So here what we try to do is we are holding space for each other to be however we find ourselves in any given moment. If we're afraid, if we're anxious, if we're feeling guilty, if we're feeling happy, relaxed, content, we just accept you as you are, and we hold space for that. The third principle, a corollary to the first two, is that there is no commerce, right? So nothing may be sold. I can't sell you anything. Gary can't sell anything when she comes on screen in a few moments. Please refrain from selling things to each other in the chat. But this includes things that are recommended as well. So even if there's a book that I think is great, that would be great for just the problem you're thinking about and grappling with, we even refrain from doing that because if I recommend something for something you're in pain about, it is not malicious, but it basically boils down to a well-meaning threat. Because then I feel, well, if I don't read this book, I'm not going to get the pain relief. I'm going to have FOMO and miss out on this great thing. And again, that's not bad. But because that works the muscles of threat and control, we simply refrain from that here. And then afterwards, you can... after when we're back in the profane world, I'll still send you emails. We can sell each other things, all the rest of it. So said another way, we are here for your energy, not for the things you bring. We are here for the essence of what you are, not for what you do or provide or your value add or function. The fourth principle then, another corollary, is that there's also no expectation of participation. So there's no pressure to do anything. You can recommend friends to come and join you. You don't have to. You can chat. You can not chat. You can stay for the whole thing, not stay for the whole thing. You can watch replay. You can do the exercise, not do the exercise. It doesn't matter, right? Because, again, the nourishment comes from the held space and your presence and attention, and our collective presence and attention, from what you are, not from what you do or provide. And all of us together will tend to amplify that effect. And the nourishment becomes like this huge potluck of this emotional, spiritual nourishment that is more than any one person could ever, consume in one sitting. So anyway, that is what I propose. And if you are not okay with that, totally cool. There's no fear, threat, and control to get you to stay in sacred space either. We're just going to pause for a moment now and give everyone just a safety check moment to make your selection whether you would like to stay or go, because in a few moments we will be moving into the sacred space. Okay. And again, if you choose not to stay, that's cool. We'll still hang out with you, be friends in profane space still. No worries at all. So I'll just pause for a moment and give everyone a chance to dial in their selection. Okay. Okay. All right. And so now for the rest of us who are here, we will now move forward together into our shared sacred space. And as we cross the threshold now into our shared sacred space, I will just gently remind everyone, myself included, that in this space, to the best of our ability, we would like to observe the 4 principles of confidentiality/anonymization, no fear, threat, or control, no fixing, no tough love, no commerce, no recommendations, and no expectation of participation. All right, here we are. Welcome back to our sacred space. And hope everyone had a happy new year and that you're all having a good month. So our session topic for this session will be how to recover from failure in life. In this session, when I did our brainstorm call together with Gary, my editor, we were led to insights about why exactly we encounter failure in our lives. Can we avoid failure or avoid the mistakes that lead us astray and in many cases cause lifelong wounds? Is failure an inevitable part of the larger pattern of the circumambulatory labyrinthine path of life itself? And to explore this, we follow the golden thread of a story from ancient Greece to understand the nature of failure and reconciliation and how to recover even from the biggest failures of our lives. So that's our topic. And with that, I'm going to invite Gary to come on screen and tell us about the story she's picked for our session.
Hi, Artie. Can you see me?
Hey, Gary. Yep. I can see you and hear you.
Great.
Thanks for being with us.
Thank you. Okay. So I've got a story from the Greek mythology this time. You pointed it out to me, actually. I would have picked a Chinese story because, you know, Happy Chinese New Year. So I was looking through this.
My fault. I take the blame. I
was looking through this book of Chinese stories, and I think I sent you a photo of it and said Happy Chinese New Year, and you were like, what, no Greek mythology?
I didn't know that was why. Wow, my request actually have weight. Well, I didn't know that.
I took that as a sign. So I came across this story of Cadmus, the founder of Thebes, right? And I was intrigued because, I read the whole story of how he founded Thebes. I was intrigued because there are several versions of the story, but he's not talked about much as a hero. Like when you mention Greek heroes, there are so many names that roll off, and Cadmus is not really one of them. And yet he's like such a powerful character at an archetypal level, right? So I was really intrigued by this, and then I realized as the story went that Cadmus is one of the oldest heroes in the Greek, mythology and the pantheon. I mean, he's even 5th generation Olympian in a way, and he's older than Jason. You get to know when you go through the story that his story comes before Jason. And when we did the session on Jason and the Golden Fleece, we were like, oh, Jason's really, really old, right? Jason's older than even Odysseus. So,
right.
So it's like we're really going back generations now.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was fascinating for me. So I thought, okay, why not? Let's do this. Okay, so that's the story of Cadmus.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you want to tell us the story? Or what?
Yeah. So we can go.
Let's do it. Let's dive in.
Right. So Cadmus came from the kingdom of Tyre. Right. His father was King Agenor. So he was the son of King Agenor and Queen Telephassa from Tyre, which later came to be known as Phoenix. So Phoenicia. And Cadmus had 3 other brothers and a sister. So there were four sons and a daughter. And while growing up, one day, the 4 boys were busy playing a game, right? Play fighting, trying to outdo each other. And their sister, Europa, was collecting flowers and making a posy and just, keeping herself busy in the meadows. And the boys weren't looking at her. They had their backs to her and were busy in their own games. And she was busy by herself. And suddenly she caught sight of a white bull with silver horns. Right? So she saw this bull with silver horns, and she was absolutely intrigued and fascinated. She wanted to get close and see what this is about, but she was a little wary, a little cautious. So she approached slowly. But when the bull turned around and looked at her, his eyes were like so kind and friendly that she overcame her shyness and her fear. And she went and touched it. And then eventually, in a few minutes, she got onto the bull's back. She was riding the bull. And as the bull moved around, she was giggling and laughing, and slowly the bull started to trot. And then the trot turned into a canter. And then slowly the bull rose up in the air, and it seemed like he was floating. And all this while, she was having a whale of a time. And this continued for a few minutes. And at one moment, the boys turned around to look at their sister. And to their horror, they realized that she was riding this bull, or the bull was taking her away, whatever it was, but the bull was now very, very far away. So they started to chase and run behind and call out her name, trying to catch up with her. But by now, the bull was really fast. It started to literally fly through the air. And they couldn't tell if Europa was having fun or was scared or what was going on. But they tried to catch up and they couldn't. And finally, they had to give up and go back home. And this is the beauty of this story, is that it branches off into so many of these famous, well-known mythic stories that we already know. Europa was taken away from the land. In fact, the bull jumped over the sea, took her to an island called Crete. Right? And we know Crete from the Minotaur stories. And Europa was the first queen of Crete. When the bull set her down on the ground, it revealed itself to be Zeus, right? And then Europa had children with Zeus, one of whom was King Minos. So that's how that story then goes off into that branch. But back home, when the boys realized they lost their sister, they went back to their father and told him what happened. And then that they had to come back home. And their father was livid, absolutely livid. And he told the boys that he wanted them to go back right away to look for their sister and bring her back home. And effectively, he said, if you can't find her, don't bother coming back. Right? So he sent all 4 of his sons out on this quest to find his only daughter. And Cadmus was the eldest. Right, his brothers Phoenix, Cilix, and Thasos, all of them went in different directions on their own quest. When Cadmus left, his mother came with him. She was so filled with grief and anxiety that she wanted to be on the quest as well. So he took his mother along. And they searched and searched, and after a while, one by one, all the 3 brothers gave up their search, and they knew that going back wasn't an option. And so whether it was the knowledge that they couldn't go back or whether it was something else that distracted them anyway, they all ended up building cities of their own in different parts of the land. And Cadmus kept searching. Eventually, his mother died, filled with grief. And he didn't know where else to look. So he decided to go to Delphi and consult the oracle there. Ask her what to do. And so when he went to Delphi, went to the temple, consulted the oracle about his quest to look for his sister, the oracle had this to say, basically, There's no point. Give up your search. You're never going to find your sister. So that's a lost cause. Right? But then it wasn't like, okay, you're not going to find a sister because she is in Crete and Zeus took her, and you might as well tell your dad. So go back and tell your father. It wasn't that. Instead of just leaving it at that, the oracle said, you're not going to find your sister. That's a pointless quest. Drop it. Instead, there is a new quest for you. Just right outside the temple, as you leave this temple, you will find a cow with the sign of the moon. Follow this cow, and wherever she stops and rests, that's the spot where you must build a new city. That's the new quest you have. And Cadmus accepted it. He stepped out of the temple, came out of the cave, down the mountain, and he didn't have to look very long. The cow was right there. And different accounts, different versions of the story give these different details about the cow. One says the cow had 2 full moons on her shoulders. One says it had a half crescent on her shoulder. But one says her horns were shaped like a crescent moon, so he knew. But whatever the version is, it's very clear that Cadmus had no trouble identifying which cow this was. It was right there, and he starts to follow it. And the cow wanders around until it comes to a river. And there's an open meadow where she just stops and lies down. So Cadmus then knows that this is the spot where he will have to build a city. He still has his, troops of men that have come with him. He's going to get to work, but first he decides to thank the gods, to worship the gods, to sacrifice this very cow. To Athena, Zeus, again, different accounts say different things, but he decides to sacrifice the cow. And for the ritual, he wants some fresh water. And he sends his men to a spring nearby, a freshwater spring. Asks them to bring water for the ritual. And they go away and they don't return in a long time. He starts to wonder. And as he goes there, he realizes there's this huge dragon guarding the spring. And all his men are dead. And at this point, he's just so taken over by rage, by anger. Everyone is killed. And so he vows that he will fight this dragon, avenge the deaths of his men, or die with them. And it's a detailed battle that is set out. One of the accounts is in Ovid's Metamorphoses, where, dragon, our friendly neighborhood dragon. And then he starts to battle this dragon. The first thing he does is takes a boulder and throws at it. And it just falls off it. It barely makes a dent. And then he takes a spear, throws it through its mouth, pins it against a tree, and then cuts across and slays it. Right? Manages to stay out of its, fire breath. But he slays the dragon. And as he kills this dragon, he's not happy, as he thinks he's avenged the death of his men. It's more like shock. He's just standing there watching, staring at the dragon. He doesn't know what to do. And at this point, Athena appears before him. And she tells It's literally like, we've got work to do. She tells him to gather the dragon's teeth, give half of the teeth to her, and then take the other half, sow the teeth into the ground like seeds. And so that's what he does. He collects the teeth, gives half to Athena, and then puts the other ones in the ground, plants them in the ground. And as soon as he does that, out of these teeth, fierce warriors start to sprout. These all fully armored soldiers come out of the ground, spring out of the ground, and they start to fight with each other. There's a violent, fierce battle that goes on. All of these Spartoi, as it's described in Greek, they fight each other until there's only 5 of them left. And the battle stops. These 5 survivors then turn to Cadmus, and they help him to build the city. And the story goes that these 5 warriors become the ancestors of the 5 noble families of Thebes. And so the city of Thebes is built. But this is not where the story ends. I mean, this is the story of how Thebes was built. The dragon that Cadmus killed happened to be protecting this freshwater spring that was sacred to Ares, the god of war. He ordered that Cadmus must serve him for 8 years as punishment for killing his dragon. Right? And so Cadmus does that. He serves Ares for 8 years. And at the end of that, Ares is quite pleased. He doesn't hold any grudge anymore. So Ares is quite happy with him. He releases him from his servitude, goes one step ahead, and gives his daughter Harmonia, his daughter with Aphrodite, Harmonia, in marriage to Cadmus. So Cadmus and Harmonia get married in this absolute grand extravaganza of a wedding where all the gods arrive to bless them. The muses come and they sing at the wedding. It's a party. And even Hephaestus, and this is a point that struck me, even Hephaestus was at the wedding. And he gifts a necklace to Harmonia as a wedding gift. And this is a necklace that he's crafted himself. But it turns out that he made this necklace when he was full of rage and anger at Aphrodite's affair with Ares. And Aphrodite is his wife, and she had this affair with Ares. He was angry about it, and he crafted this necklace. Had poisoned that necklace, and there was a curse on it. This is the necklace that he gives to Harmonia. And it is said that because of this necklace, tragedies ensued, not just in Cadmus's life, but in the life of his descendants, his children, his grandchildren. Again, it's into so many of the Greek tragedies that we know. Some of them, and I won't go too much into this part of his life because it's more centered around his children and grandchildren. Some of them I feel like are not really tragedies, but probably that's for another session, another day. But what is for sure is it did cause a lot of anguish to Cadmus, to a point where eventually, after serving as the king of Thebes for many years, he decides to leave Thebes with Harmonia, and he wanders around all over Greece. But it's almost like there is this power he has, this kingly power that follows him around as well, because eventually he comes across this tribe who are constantly battling amongst each other. It's an endless series of wars. And when they consult about how to stop their wars and how to find peace within their community, the oracle tells them to approach Cadmus and make them their king. And so they do that, and Cadmus becomes their king, puts an end to their wars. And this is just another city kingdom that he rules. But eventually, even here, he tires of all of this, and he leaves Illyria. This is the city called after his son, one of his sons. He leaves Illyria and he wanders around. Harmonia comes along with him. And the anguish and pain and grief of all of the tragedies in his family keep haunting him. Get rid of those thoughts. And eventually this thought occurs to him that this all started with the slaying of the dragon. Somehow he seems to go back to that moment. And he can't shake this thought off. And he finally says, well, if the gods love this dragon so much, if the gods find this dragon to be so precious that they continue to torture me for killing this dragon, it's been so many years, right? And this curse continues across generations. If the gods were so pleased with this dragon, then let me turn into one. Let me turn into a serpent myself. And as he said this, he started to grow scales. His body started to transform. First, he got a tail of the serpent, and the scales kept moving up, and his body started to change. And he turned into this huge serpent. And Harmonia was right next to him, and she was looking horrified, not knowing what was going on. And she started to cry out, "Wait!" And when she realized what happened, that her husband had turned into a serpent, she stripped herself, kneeled and asked the gods to turn her into a serpent as well. And which Zeus, looking upon all this, he did. He turned Harmonia into a serpent, and both Cadmus and Harmonia coiled around each other. And the story says, avoiding humans, avoiding people, because they didn't want to harm anyone. But also, they then went into Elysium, the eternal paradise, so they could live harmoniously forever. So that's the story of Cadmus. And Artie, are you there?
Hello?
Yeah, I can hear you. Sorry. Yeah, you're back.
There we are. Thank you. I love hearing the story a second time. It's so fun.
Yeah, I've been sitting with this story for the whole weekend, like from the time we discussed this, and since then, this entire weekend. It's an amazingly powerful story.
Say more. I mean, I'll just ask my usual starting question, which is, where do you enter into this story?
So when I started to read this, right, I mean, I told you I was intrigued because Cadmus is not really talked about much, except for this thing that always says, oh, Cadmus was the founder of Thebes. And then I went into the story of how he founded Thebes. And the first thing that made me sit up was that, you know, he was the last to give up the quest of looking for his sister. But as soon as his mother died, he consulted the oracle on what to do. It was almost like his mother transformed into this guide, right? This oracle, that instant transformation that happened. And then the oracle sends him off on another quest. And all through the story, then I started to look for it once it hit me. All through the story, you have such strong symbols of the feminine all over the story. Right? You've got the moon sign, you've got the cow, you've got the oracle herself, and you've got Athena, you've got all of these signs all through the story, guiding him, telling him what to do. It's almost like there's a plan charted out all in advance, right, waiting for Cadmus. And okay, you know, now that you're here, we have directions and this map, and you just need to do 1, 2, 3. So it's like it's a muse all over the story,
right?
And we're doing the muse cohort right now with our cohort, and I was like, okay, this can't be a coincidence that I'm reading such a strong muse story, and so this has to be it. And so that's what came to me until the point where we came to the slaying of the dragon. All right. And we've done these symbols before in our other mythic stories and sessions. There is the freshwater spring, which is like, you know, clear water inside. And there's a dragon guarding that inside. I mean, how many times have we come across this, right?
This is the princess and the frog sitting on the well.
So sitting on the well, there's this thing keeps coming, and we know this. And I'm like, oh, there he goes. He's going to kill the dragon, you know. And that's exactly what happens. So absolutely. I mean, this just so on theme to everything we've done so far. But what completely blew me away was towards the end, there are all this entire transformation into the serpent. Like, I didn't see that coming. And it just made so much sense. Again, as we go through this, I will, you know, put in more details about that. But it's like, that makes complete sense. But that was amazing to just come across that.
Yeah, I thank you for picking the story. You know, I love the story because for me, the Greek myths of the older generation, Jason and before, because we're used to the Olympians and basically the Iliad and the Odyssey, that generation, right? But Jason is like a generation or two before the Iliadic heroes, the Homeric heroes. And then this is even way before Jason. So I typically gloss over these stories because they tend to have a more brutal quality to them. They're less full circle, right? And for me, I've always thought they may not have been originally that brutal because they're so old. We've lost parts of the story to the mists of time. And maybe the more brutal, jarring pieces are the ones that have been retained. And so here, I thought it would be more like incomplete feeling because it's pre-Homeric. And you found a story that is actually shockingly well preserved, right, in its full circleness. And so when you're reading the story and he says he slays the dragon, my whole body was like, oh my God, here we go. This is one of those stories where we're going to lose the back fragment, where I'm going to have to fill in the picture of reconciliation with the inner feminine. And people will be like, well, you know, you don't know that because it was just Artie just making stuff up. And I'm like, so, right? So slaying the dragon is primitive, heroic, and let's all go home with a trophy thing. Light and dark, good versus evil, one side wins, end of story, which is very linear. Right? And to me, the most violent stories are the linear stories. Even in our modern world, it's like the hero goes in, shoots up a bunch of people, leaves with the girl, and that's it, rides off into the sunset. Or even the sort of Judeo-Christian tradition where it's like we're in this straight line linear path. It's not cyclical. You know, Christ is not Osiris. Christ is not the second coming of like Asclepius or Apollo or anything. It's like historically, this is the one and only. And after this, there will be no others. And once we reach the finish line of, you know, the apocalypse, that's it. Everything's done. There's no regeneration. There's no cyclicality. And as a result, it's brutal, right? The storyline makes the linearity of the archetype makes it brutal. Because everyone's like looking for the end of days and preparing for that. So as opposed to cyclical stories where everything comes full circle. So a linear-esque story is more profane percentage-wise in terms of the sliding scale. A cyclical story tends to be more sacred. And the reasons for this, basically, I talk all about this in the LSS we did, I think, a couple of years ago now, which is like the sacred and profane in concepts of time. So I explain sort of, you know, linear time, which is more profane, and cyclical time, which is more sacred. And the quick thumbnail here is basically, when you have linear time, time is an arrow, right? Time is an arrow, a vector. And as an arrow, it is intrinsically uncentered, right? Because you're always going towards something, right? So by definition, you're not where you need to be. You're going somewhere. So you're not in the present. You've lost the present moment. And, you know, in our modern world, where like it's industrial arrow of time, we're always busy. We're always rushing to the next thing. We can't sit and meditate even for 5 seconds. And we're not in the present. We're always looking to the future or looking to the past with regrets, fear, threat, and control, and then projecting that onto the future. So in this linear time archetype, there is a perceived end of times, end of days, apocalypse, final judgment. And we act always in this expectation. We're always acting in a defensive crouch against the coming hammer that's going to come down. Okay. So linear time, it's just the physics of it. It's not good or bad, right? It's just out of the present moment and in the world of fear, threat, and control. So linear time tends to be more profane. When it is cyclical time, there is no end. The cycle goes on forever. That's number one. Number two, cyclical time is centered, because when you draw a circle, there is a center. It centers and circles around something, right? A straight line has no center. A circle has a center. This is not a dogma or value judgment. It's just geometry, right? So this means in cyclical time, you are always in the present moment. You are literally holistic, right? Fully complete and whole in itself. Cyclical systems, cultures, societies are always doing the thing now, both right now and for not just the next generation, but for all generations in the future in perpetuity. If I'm just thinking about next quarter, you know, earnings reports on Wall Street next year, it is linear. If I expand to all future generations forever, it is so far out, it becomes cyclical. Your centricity changes, your attitude changes, your body feeling changes, everything changes. So when I thought the story was going to be this linear fragment, I thought, oh man, I've got a lot of work to do. But this story you picked goes even one better, right? So not to, you know, go too deep, but any linearity without a cyclical larger context becomes toxic, right? Yeah. We all learn in geometry. If we have a circle and we reduce the segments smaller and smaller, there is going to be a small enough segment where it's basically linear, right? This is the beginning of algebra and the calculus, right? Yeah. And so that's fine, but the linear arrow needs to be taken in the context of a larger circle. We're doing this in our muse cohort now, when the whole cohort where we're talking about unblocking the power of your muse. We're really getting into the technical details about how you do that. So when we say, how do you recover your muse? It's not about just woohoo, running off to join the circus, following my muse and don't worry about making a living or making money or worrying about prestige. When you recover your muse and make her the new center of your circle, the things that orbit around her are still, you still pay taxes, you still, eat 3 meals a day, all of that stuff, right? Your priorities are all there, but they tend to center around your center purpose. So in my own story, when I left the linear world of high tech and being a founder CEO for this world of like healing and advising, the center of my entire world shifted. And so what ended up being my bliss and my muse, in this world I am now, I mean, I still make money and prestige. It's just coming to me in a different way, right? Money and prestige is no longer the center. They revolve around a different center. I still pay my taxes. I still, wash my car. I still care in a different way about what people think of me, but I'm more relaxed and centered in myself. So even if I don't do anything else, it's like, how many people am I going to try and advise and heal in my lifetime? How many videos are we going to put out? It doesn't matter. Right. If I don't do one extra additional thing, I'm done. I've been done basically for several years now. So anyway, I love that about the story. And the way the story works out for me is that Cadmus slays the dragon. And that generally is the kind of, oh, shoot moment, right? Yeah. In healing, those of you who have done like 7-day healing with me, this dragon is the same as the frog and the princess and the frog. This dragon is the lost board member of the 7-day healing program that we try to recover in day 3. This is the part of us that we stuff down in early life. And here, right, in this, the lost board member is feminine, tends to be feminine. Most of the lost board members in today's world, among individuals and societies, are feminine because the tendency of the master archetype or template of our society right now, it is a patriarchy, right? So the reflexive tendency is to exile the feminine. So by default, that is the approximation. So if you watch the progression of how the failure happens and then is rectified, it happens that right at the beginning, with Cadmus and his brothers and his sister, there's already a lopsided masculine-feminine mix. There are 4 boys and 1 girl, right? The ideal is the self as a quaternity, 2-2, right? And you have 2 males, 2 females, or, if it's 1-on-1, 1 male, 1 female, or it's balanced, right? So if you look at things like the Christian Trinity, right? There's 2 males, father and son. There's a Holy Ghost, which is basically female, but nobody talks about it. And it's a Trinity. There's no 4th. And of course, there's Mother Mary, who somehow is not a goddess. And so the feminine is exiled, suppressed. Even, Madonna, whore complex, she's like vilified as the devil as well. So here it is unbalanced. There are 4 boys and 1 girl. And the boys lose the girl because they're not paying attention. Right. And what lures her away? What lures Europa away is this vision of a fully balanced, integrated masculine feminine. This is an unbalanced masculine feminine yearning for balance and reconciliation, right? Which is the bull. So why is the bull a symbol of integrated masculine and feminine? Yeah. In our dream work, we come across certain special symbols that are especially evocative of the intrinsic integration between masculine and feminine. So a happily married couple, when you dream of sex, and it's good, consensual, lovely, wonderful sex. But also when you dream of a tower is, it looks phallic from the outside because it's this like shaft, right? But it's also hollow inside, right? Like a lighthouse. The lighthouse is no good if you can't go inside and go to the top, so to see and warn the ships. So the hollow inside is more womb-like, right? It is more feminine. And with a tower, it's intrinsically phallic, masculine, and feminine, the inside, the sheath. And you can't separate the two. Right? The thing is intrinsically both at the same time, just like intertwined snakes. Another example is the lion. Cats are intrinsically feminine in these mythical systems, but the lion itself is masculine, very king-like. The mane is king-like, very solar, like the shining sun, which is also masculine compared to the feminine moon. But it's a lion, it's a cat. So it's this masculine, kingly cat. How do you separate the masculine and the feminine apart when you're looking at a lion? You can't. And the bull is the third of these very special symbolic totems, where the cow is typically, bovine is thought of cow as the feminine, the mother, the nourisher, and here in masculine form, because a bull is a masculine bovine.
Yeah.
The head of the bull, right, has always been a symbol of feminine fertility and generativity, right? In I think it's like the Sumerian kind of pre-Christian, pre-Hellenic, certainly pre-Christian systems. You'll see in Hindu art and Sumerian, Mesopotamian art, a bull shown with like a half crescent facing upward to be the horns, but it is very obviously and intentionally a moon. Right, so the half moon crescent is often drawn in as the horns of the bull. The moon, feminine, and the bull are closely linked. And this archetype of the bull as feminine appears in the collective consciousness again and again. So like Georgia O'Keeffe's paintings, right, of the bull, skull, and horns. Right, she may say in interviews, "I don't know, this just came to me. This is not feminine. My drawings of flowers are not pictures of feminine like genitalia." But it's like there's a reason these appear to us as signs. You just look at the thing, and it's like the birth canal and the ovaries. So anyway, the sister is lured away by the pure joy and bliss of being with a fully integrated masculine and feminine. And this bull is provided. It is Zeus, which in the Olympian system is the executive function. His job is to maintain balance and order among all the sort of organs of the Olympian pantheon, so that the world actually hangs together and doesn't fly apart into chaos. So she is taken off to be the queen of Crete. Her son is Minos. Of course, everything's cyclical. So Minos gets into trouble because he doesn't sacrifice the white perfect bull back to Poseidon. So Poseidon curses Pasiphae, and she has sex with this mechanical bull that she tells Daedalus to blah, blah, blah. So long story short, the bull is not there by accident. So now the boys have to recover the feminine. The king sends them out. There's no coming back. It's like, you guys, it was already lopsided, and you chuckleheads went ahead and lost Europa. So it's like, if you don't come back with some sliver of feminine, just don't bother coming back. We're all screwed anyway. There's no continuity without the feminine, right? Okay. So the question then is, how do we get out of this pickle? How do we get out of this pickle? The answer is the muse, the feminine principle, guides you back. Europa leaves, and you're like, oh my gosh, it was already bad, and now she's actually made good on her threats, and she's left me, right? But this starts this whole, epic saga across all these different stories and clans and families of the Greek tradition. And this golden thread of the feminine leads you back, right? Because the Greek system is cyclical. In the Christian system, 3 strikes and you're out, you're done in this lifetime, you go to hell forever, for eternity. There's no probation, there's no second chance. But with the muse, it's like, no, that's fine. We'll get you back again, right? And later you will betray us again, and that's fine. We'll give you another shot even after that. That's unconditional love.
Yeah. And also it's, for me, when I read this, I felt like in this story, at least for me, Cadmus is a hero because, not because he killed the dragon or he founded Thebes, but because his first thing when he gets desperate, his mother dies. What do? Insult the oracle. It's like, you know, in his quest to find his sister, he eventually says, okay, I'm going to change direction and find the feminine, even if that's not my sister. Right. And he goes and seeks out this sort of, you know, magical divine priestess feminine to guide him. So that's heroic for me, the way I read that.
Yeah, it's ironic, right? It's like, it's not the Judeo-Christian tradition, right, where you get one shot and that's it. And even there are some particularly harsh sub-traditions of Judaism. So like the Calvinist thread of the Protestant tradition, when you talk about things like predestination, where it's like you don't even get the one shot. You don't get any shot. It was already decided before you were born whether you're going to be elect or damned. So just, and you can't even relax. I would be like, well, if I made it or not made, it's not up to me. I'm just going to party in this lifetime. And it's like, no, you can't even do that. It's like, okay, what is the scam going on here? What is really going on here? But with the muse, with the feminine, with cyclical systems, the reality is that you get infinite shots. Because love is unconditional. Right? When you find yourself in these systems, you have to ask yourself, do I believe that the all-powerful creator of everything loves me only conditionally? When I'm healthy and not wounded, I, as a mere mortal, even love my children unconditionally. I would die for them. And I'm just a mortal. I'm just the clay figurine, apparently. And I'm apparently made in God's image, but God does not love unconditionally, only conditionally. I was like, okay. I think I'm not going to place a bet on this card table on the street. I'm going to move on and just like get my vegetables. Right? It's like, thanks, but no thanks, right?
Yeah.
And so when you realize you get infinite shots, you relax and everything flows. The muse actually flows through you. Right? The title of this LSS session is How to Recover from Failure. I will go through that, right? We'll go through how the story kind of walks you through all that. But the real secret for me is, given this dynamic of the cyclicality, how would you actually live your life differently if you knew you could not fail? If you knew that there was nothing you could do that could make you lose love?
Yeah.
Right? What would change? How would the center of your life actually change? And the Muse cohort, advising cohort we're in right now, we are in the middle of like giving the hands-on tactical and strategic answer to all of that.
Yeah.
In this Cadmus story, we have a lot of the basic physics of this. So the bull is the next turn of the feminine, and then Cadmus goes out with his mother. She dies, transforms, and then that's the next turn. And then he goes to the oracle, the next feminine.
Yeah.
Because the Delphic oracle is feminine, right? It's the Apollonic oracle at Delphi, which I actually visited last year, which is incredible. Apollo went there to the temple originally, where it was the Pythian oracle. It was the oracle, and the oracle was associated with Python, the snake goddess. And he did battle with Python, killed Python. Apollo killed the snake. Okay. And then took over, and it became the Delphic oracle of Apollo. Even under the Apollonic reign, the sort of patriarchal Greek reign, it was still the priestesses that did the channeling. And then the priests actually wrote down what they said and then interpreted. And what's fascinating here is that the Delphic oracle's prophecies are usually come in riddles, right? When the sort of hubristic, sort of bearing kings go to consult, they're given like a cryptic message, which they typically read wrongly in their hubris, and off they go. But here, what's beautiful is that in Cadmus's case, the oracle gives him an absolutely straight answer, because she favors him. Right? No riddle. He's like, yeah, so go outside, you're going to see a cow, follow the cow, and sacrifice. And he's like, is that a riddle? And she's like, okay. Do you need me to like write it out for you? He's like, oh no, I got it. Okay, and by the way, here's a tea and some sandwiches. You know, stay out of trouble, kid. You know.
Yeah.
So he's favored by the gods, and even after slaying the dragon, right? Athena shows up and just tells him what to do.
Yes.
Okay. So the oracle tells him to follow the cow. The cow leads him to the freshwater spring, this like bubbling well of insight, guarded by the dragon, which he slays. And of course, as we know from the Frog and the Princess, if you, instead of killing the dragon, you talk to the dragon is our lost board member.
Yeah.
Instead of exiling the dragon, if you talk to the dragon will bring you back your golden ball, which is the full integrated self, masculine and feminine.
Yeah.
But he doesn't do that, right? So he slays the dragon.
Yeah.
And this happens because he walks into the insight, the fountain, unconsciously. He sends his men in instead of going himself. And this is a recurring theme in the Greek tradition. So in the Odyssey, countless times, like Odysseus will fall asleep. So Odysseus is the king, Zeus, Cadmus, executive function, your consciousness. Mm-hmm. He falls asleep, and his men, his impulses, get him into trouble. Right? It's like they open the alien bag of winds at the wrong time. They like slay and eat the cattle of Helios, and I'm like, oh my god, really, guys? And each time it's because Odysseus falls asleep, and he wakes up, and it's like, you idiots, right? What? Every time, really? Every time? And it's like, yes, Odysseus, every time. Why do you fall asleep? And so Cadmus sends his men in. They all get eaten, and he's like, "Oh my gosh, I have to kill whatever killed them."
It's very interesting how this comes out because you know, through the week, in particular today, for me this is Sunday night, right? The whole of Sunday, I'd been sitting and sort of trying to get downloads and insights for, you know, the mothers and daughters, you know, the retreat or workshop we're going to do. Yeah. And so I'm trying to kind of get all these insights for that. And I was sitting with it, and in comes the dragon, like my dragon, completely intercepted whatever I was doing. And then I spend like the entire day just interviewing the dragon. So that's what happens. And the interesting thing for me is halfway through this interview, this conversation I was having with the dragon, I realize this dragon sounds like Cadmus's dragon, right? So I just had this question, Cadmus's men, and the dragon was like in that full rage mode, right? It was funny, and I have the dragon's permission to share this. So sorry for the language, but the dragon turned around and said, "Should have shown some fucking respect, shouldn't they?" You know, so it's like that was so spontaneous.
Who should have shown respect? Cadmus?
Cadmus's men, you know. So because I was like Cadmus, like, okay, Cadmus was full of rage and he just, you know, killed you right away. But I'm asking you, why his men? And she's like, should have shown some fucking respect, shouldn't they? You know. And I was so taken aback by that because
it doesn't sound like a riddle to me. That sounds pretty linear and literal.
So yeah, so coming to the point where it's just so like it's obvious now in hindsight that when you see a dragon, that's what you do. You talk to the dragon, right? But invariably, like, we're so caught up in the moment and so probably unconscious, like you said, right? We come across this insight completely unconscious, and then that's the instinct. The first thing to do is just kill the dragon, no questions asked, and regret it later. You know, that's like, oh, my biggest failures come out of this moment and that moment. It's, yeah. it's fascinating how common this is, how often this happens.
Yeah, and it's just beautiful because in a cyclical system, governed by the muse and the goddess, basically, you get infinite shots.
Yeah.
Because that's the nature of unconditional love. It doesn't matter what you do.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, in this case, we see the same thing happen. The story, he slays the dragon, and I'm like, oh my gosh, here we go. And the whole thing comes full circle eventually, right?
Yeah.
So after he slays the dragon, the beautiful thing is Athena shows up, right? No thunderbolt. It's like, what did I do? It's like, she just shows up in person. And she's like, oh, she's looking at the carnage. She's like, okay, yeah, okay, so that happened. All right. All right, Cadmus. Fine. And he's like, oh shit, here we go. I'm sorry, goddess. And she's like, all right, get the teeth. Now what I want you to do with the actually, come to think, give me half the teeth.
Which she then goes and gives it to Jason later.
A generation later, she keeps the teeth. Those are the teeth that Jason sewn when he went to get the golden fleece. And the same soldiers came up and fought. So it's like Athena is like masterminding all of this, right? She's basically Zeus's brain. She like comes fully armed. She was never a child. She is born fully armed.
Yeah.
And in full adulthood, born from Zeus's brain, basically.
Yeah.
So she's like, all right, get the teeth, give me half, and let me tell you what to do. And so the natural question that comes from this is, killing the dragon was clearly a monumental screw up of epic proportions. And yet this is one of the founding stories of Greek civilization.
Yeah.
So are we supposed to be screwing up? Right? Or are there scenarios where we actually avoid screwing up and we live in some kind of like Elysium of an ideal world? Or do we just keep screwing up? That's part of this. That's just part of life. And the feminine continues accommodating us almost as like a continued expression of unconditional love.
Yeah.
Right. And maybe it's a bit of both. And just to be fair, right, in the well, let's just say the Christian tradition, in certain Christian traditions, Christ has infinite love for you. It's unconditional, it's godlike, it's divine. So there's like the sacred sort of muse-like quality to it. And then of course, the pastor's got to get people going and like get donations to fix the roof of the church. And he's like, but if you screw up, it will be eternal hellfire. So, do as you're told, stay out of trouble. Right. And don't think that in the final thing, you can just throw yourself at the mercy of the court and you'll be led into heaven anyway. But it's like, when you look at the overall, if you're claiming all these things, it's like, isn't that what's going to happen? Right? Isn't everyone going to get back into heaven?
Yeah.
Right? And it's like under the profane, sort of very narrow viewed, linear view of things. It's like, well, I mean, even if that's true, we can't admit it because everyone will be robbing banks and like killing people and stealing, with reckless abandon. And what I found in my own experience, it's like when I realize, and when people I work with realize and have this feeling in their body that they are loved without condition by the universe.
Yeah.
Right? You can do anything and you will not lose love. The reaction 100% of the time is not, woohoo, I'm going to go like, rob a bank. The reaction is like, the world loves me this much. And then I look around and I see that the world is like kind of on fire, climate change and all the things that are going on. You start wringing your hands and it's like, well, I got to take care of the world. The world's got my back and the world's hair is on fire. I got to get a bucket. And like,
yeah.
It's just a spontaneous outpouring of like, and it's not even, oh, compassion and now you're a good person. It's like, no, this is my mom. She's got my back. She's cooking dinner every night for me, even though her hair is on fire. It's like, you know, get a bucket. Let's like, you know, let's make sure she's taken care of.
Yeah.
And so with the dragon and the serpent, right? So after multiple turns around, you know, all the turns of the feminine, all the turns around the labyrinth, right? The labyrinth itself, this thing, right? The labyrinth itself is a serpent coiled in on itself, right? Yeah. This whole story is a big serpent turning back and forth, twisting and turning. At the end of his life, Cadmus's life, what does the good king do? And it's like highlighted in neon, right? That he's a good king. Not only is he the founding king of Thebes, it's like other tribes that find him. The gods are like, oh, we didn't know he was coming through your territory. You better grab him and make him your king. Get him while the getting's good. Right? So he is like the archetypal good king. Within you. Within you.
Yeah.
What does the good king do? Who finally realizes that all this started when he slew the dragon. He's like, you know what? That was probably a bad move. I probably should have brought like some coffee and donuts and be like, hey, do you want to just kind of hang? I'm not going to touch the spring. I'm not going to touch the spring. I'm just like, can I just tell you, like, I've had a bit of a day, you know, with the whole Europa and everything. Can I get your advice? Like, what do you think? But of course, the dragon would have like turned into Athena, and it's like, oh, good one, you got it. Now let me tell you what to do, and save you 3 turns around the track, right?
And 8 years of servitude with Ares.
And 8 years of servitude, the whole 9 yards,
yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So at the time when he slew the dragon, he just had to keep going, right? Yeah. After all these additional circumambulations in life, he realized it. And it's like, I think that was a mistake, right? You don't realize it at the moment, but only after a few turns later. Like in the Muse cohort we're doing right now, you know, people are like, well, you know, I sort of listened to my Muse. You know, when I was young, she said, I want to be a writer. And what they meant was, you know, fiction novelist. And it's like, well, then the fear, threat, and control of like, oh my gosh, how am I going to make money? And my parents are breathing down my neck. So instead of being a writer, they became an international lawyer, you know, with like a specialization in tax and like property, you know, IP, whatever it is. And, you know, the sort of twisted logic is like, well, I mean, you do write a lot when you're a lawyer, right? And that literally carried them through of a couple decades. And it's like, they made fabulous money, you know, but now at this period in their life, they're like, because when they were like, let's just be an international lawyer, because that's writing too, isn't it? They slew the dragon. Right? So at the time, when you slay the dragon and you exile this part of yourself, it doesn't feel like an atrocity. You're like, this thing just killed my men. What am I supposed to do? Let it kill me too? Walk away and let my men all die in vain? It's like, obviously, this is the next step. Right? Oh, they disrespected the dragon. It's like everybody else is disrespecting their dragon. I'm just going with the flow. I'm just following orders, right? So when you slay the dragon, everyone's like, oh my gosh, she slew the dragon. Oh my gosh, she went into international law instead of being a starving artist, fiction novelist, right? It's like, nobody thinks of that and recoils. They're like, yeah, I did that too. Everybody did. Everybody does that. Everybody slays their dragon. But it's only after a few turns where you're like, you know, basically 35 and up, you see a Muse cohort thing and you're like, yeah, all the money I made from being a lawyer, I can set aside a little bit of that to do this thing. And they go in and they're like, that probably I mean, I don't regret it per se, but it's like, it probably, you know, going to international law was probably not as inevitable or mandatory as it felt at the time. You know, I mean, hey, if you roll back the clock and put me in that exact seat, you know, 9 times out of 10, I would have done exactly the same thing, right? So there's no blame or like whatever. But here, Cadmus, after all these terms, all the ups and downs, all the anguish of the curse of Ares on like all his children and grandchildren, you know, he has the prestige of being like the grandfather of like Dionysus, right? The Olympian. But it's like all that is small comfort. He's just like, you know, I don't care what I got, all the money I made in international law. It's like thinking back, it's like there was probably a different path I could have gone down. Yeah. And there's grief around that. There's anguish. And what is his solution? He doesn't sacrifice 100 bulls, which is what the normal thing would be, right? He doesn't negotiate with the gods, rage against the gods. Oh, you like tricked me. He doesn't go on another quest. He doesn't send his sons out to make up for his failed quest. It's like, okay, we've seen that movie before. That's what my dad did. That's what I'm not going to do going forward. He's just like, if the serpent was the main thing, and because of my mistake and failure, we're short one serpent in the world, and the gods basically are all like, still, even after all this water under the bridge, still pissed. It's like, I didn't know serpents were so important. Let's put a serpent back in the world. Let me be the one. Willingly, with enthusiasm. Not because I'm going to get anything back. Everything that's done, the cursed grandchildren, that's done. My mom dying, done. Everything is done. We're not going to roll back time. But as a king, as a good king, he sees the larger picture, just like Zeus. He sees the larger picture of the imbalance in the world. And he says, as king, this is mine to fix. This is on me. Nobody's putting it on me. I'm taking it and putting it on me, and I will fix it. Yeah. So he changes into the serpent. And Harmonia says, where do you think you're going? And he's probably like, look, your dad, and you know, the whole, and she's like, never mind about my dad. You know, we're in this together. I'm coming with you. And he's like, oh, all right. Yeah. And they both become serpents. Now, just like how we teach about grief when we use the Grimm's tale, The Devil's Sooty Brother, to teach about grief, one of the things we talk about is how in these fairy stories and myths, you want to keep an eye, you want to keep a tally of the math of like who's up, who's down, what's going on. And in The Devil's Sooty Brother, obviously, midway through the story, there was 1 sack of gold that you gained. And then you lost it. But when you come full circle, you get another sack of gold, and then you get the original sack back. So in the end, you end up with 2 sacks, not 1. The tally has doubled. So all the, you know, ups and downs, and the monster comes back in the end and, you know, sort of takes another chunk out of you. In the end, you still, it's like the classic hero's journey. You know, you start here, you go down, but when you stop, you're at a higher point than where you began, right? Yeah. So here, the same thing. You know, he did the right thing. Not only established that the serpent is good, but the whole story is a serpent, right? Yeah. And all the terms of the feminine are serpentine. Yeah. Okay. And at the beginning of the story, we had 1 dragon. We lost the dragon, and now at the end of the story, we have 2 dragons. Right, so the tally has doubled. And they are coiled together in perfect unity. His wife is literally named Harmony. Yeah. Okay. And you see this coiled serpent symbol a lot of places. In Hermes and his caduceus, right, is 2 serpents coiled around the sort of staff. intersecting 7 times for the 7 chakras. And the caduceus of Hermes was gifted to him by his elder half-brother, Apollo. So Apollo kills the Pythian serpent and takes over the oracle. But in another turn of his being, he gifts Hermes the coiled double serpent.
Yeah.
Right. So slaying the serpent, as we look at the story, is part of the larger serpentine pattern. Your greatest failures are part of the journey, the archetype that you are, sort of tracing out with the turns of your life. I mean, the coiled serpents is also in the story of Tiresias, right? The Tiresias is the seer. That Odysseus, in the Odyssey, goes into the underworld to consult to figure out how to get home. But the original backstory of Tiresias was all about the coiled serpents.
And Tiresias is from Thebes. It's just delicious. It's delicious how that is. He's from Thebes.
Yeah, so the bull is not an accident. The 2 coiled serpents is not an accident.
And so when I first realized that Tiresias is from Thebes, and this is a story about the founder of Thebes, the question that came to me was, wait, were the coiled serpents that Tiresias encountered like his ancestors? Like was that Cadmus and Harmonia that he actually disturbed?
That's very interesting. Interesting.
So it's just delicious how the story is so full of these clues. Yeah.
Yeah. So even this horrible epic failure, slaying the serpent.
Yeah.
Right. The archetypal signal marker of failure in our sort of telling here. Even the slaying of the serpent is part of the pattern.
Yeah.
Right. This is why when we do healing, I'm like, you exiled your board member. You lost touch with your muse. You went into international law instead of actually writing novels. And then you're like, I'm an idiot. I'm a failure. There's no redemption for me. I'm like, no. Right. Your failure is part of the larger pattern. But then there's the next part of the pattern, which is go in and get your muse back, get your lost board member back. Right. You're like, oh, they're not going to talk to me. It's like, look at a story like this. It's like Cadmus is like the ultimate, messing it up over and over again. So go in and talk to it nicely. Don't be a jerk. Right. Don't be a jerk. And when you get it back, when you recover your lost board member on day 3 of the 7-day healing program, everyone's like, oh my gosh, we're reconciled. And this is incredible. And how did this happen only after 3 days? I've been in therapy for 30 years and nothing's pulled it together like this. And I'm like looking at my watch going like, I'm going to start the stopwatch now. And, I'm never going to let this part of me go. 3 weeks later, on cue. This is not failure. This is part of the pattern. I'll get an email going, yeah, it's weird. I had such a great experience with the 7-day healing program. And now I'm in a funk again. And all these things are like cropping up. My backache is coming back. And my first question always is, well, how's your lost board member? And they're like, who? You remember when we did the program, there's this interview we did. I was like, oh, yeah. Well, that was great. But I mean, I did it. I did the interview. I cried. And I mean, we're like done, right? Or weren't we done? I thought we were done. You said 7 days. And I'm like, okay. Remember in the interview, like part of your liberation and release and breakthrough was the lost board member asked for certain things. And you're like, absolutely. I will fix this. I will be different. I'll do these things differently. And they're like, I think so. And I'm like, how are we? Where are we on those requests? And they're like, I don't know. And I'm like, well, why don't you go back and talk to her and check in? It's like, no. I swore up and down I would never leave her again after 30 years. And now after 3 weeks, I've thrown her over the side of the boat again. She's never going to want to talk to me now. And I'm like, you can go listen to this 2-hour Cadmus LSS. Or, if you don't have time, just shut up and take my word for it. Just go back, talk to her. Everything's going to be all right. And sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. If they don't, they just circumambulate more until they finally go back. And of course, the dragon is there in the water with a life ring, just smoking your cigarette, waiting for you. And they're like, oh, hello, darling. I can't believe you're back only after 3 months. The last time it was 30 years. Great. Yeah. Let's go. Right? Let's go. So even if you betray her again and again, the muse is always like, hey, chief, ready when you are. I mean, I'm immortal. You are not. So whenever you're ready, we'll go. Right? You get unlimited tries. Even after you die. We'll see. We'll see. Right? And I'm not going to get into that here, but it's like there's the LSS from like the beginning of pandemic where I think it's like the golden thread and honoring the dead. Right? Which was a bit of a heavy LSS, but there I talk about, you know, the golden thread like after you die. So truly unlimited tries. So anyway, how do you recover from failure? You recover the muse you lost. She will tell you what to do. Athena shows up after you've slain the dragon and just gives it to you in crayon. Each time you fail, right, you have basically moved the ball further down the field. But it's not linear. It's cyclical. It's circumambulatory. Okay, it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Next time you meet a dragon within you, stay out of its fire-breathing range, right? But like wave to it, talk to it, wave your box of donuts. It's like, you know, can we talk? This is classic. This is a classic theme that comes up again and again. So in the Star Wars movie, in like Empire Strikes Back, when Luke goes to train with Yoda, and then in the Dagobah forest, jungle, he has this trial where he goes into the force tree, into this tree, where it's like he's going to meet his deepest, darkest fear, and it ends up being meeting himself as Darth Vader, right? The moment when he walks in, he starts buckling on his like holster with his gun. And Yoda's like, your weapons, you will not need them. And Luke looks back at him and buckles on his gun anyway. And Yoda's like, all right, you know. And he goes in, and of course, you know, you encounter what you bring in. If you fight the dragon, it will fight you. If you bring donuts for the dragon, it may still be pissed and spit at you a little bit, but if you just wait it out, it will sit and have donuts with you. Right.
The other touching thing for me about the dragon that we're talking about, conversing with the dragon, is that even when Cadmus kills the dragon, in its transformed version, as its teeth, and then eventually when it sprouts all these warriors, and 5 of those warriors then helped Cadmus build the city. Even in this transformed version, it's
the dragon is helping
to help him, right?
The dragon is helping.
So when I think about that, and we say, oh, you know, I did this, I slew the dragon, and this was a failure, and I'm a failure today. You're looking, like we spoke in the previous session, in the previous Sacred Space session, it's like everything is part of the golden thread.
Yeah.
So
that's right.
Every failure that you're thinking about as a big failure has contributed to where you are today. So it is going spittingly well as it is.
Yeah.
And calling it a failure probably is part of slaying the dragon as well. Right? Naming things as failures is part of slaying the dragon again and again. Yeah. Like you said, we do that all over again.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, because after he slayed the dragon, he could be like, well, I'm a failure, I'm done, I'm just going to give up. And the muse shows up in the form of Athena. And it's like, yeah, not so fast. You're not done. So the beauty of Cadmus in the end is that after you get older, you've done this whole movie a couple of times now. Right? You keep an eye out for things that seem nasty and embarrassing and shameful and humiliating. And your first instinct is not to kill it or suppress it. Your first instinct becomes to engage it and ask questions. Okay. And when the king asks himself a question, what happened with all this? All right. That is the healing question. So when we teach on the Fisher King, when I work with men, but also women, and I teach on the Fisher King, the Grail King is healed when Parsifal asks the healing question, which is, what is the matter here? What ails the king?
Yeah.
Right. And in the system of that myth, it's not the answer that heals. It's the very asking of the question that is the healing act.
Yeah.
So just in asking the question, the Grail King stands up and is miraculously healed. Even the Grail could not heal his wound. But this question is even more powerful than the Grail. And so he asks, and he leads himself into the conclusion that, like, I will be a serpent. So literally, the king turns into the inner masculine, it turns into the inner feminine. But he's still the king, but he's the king serpent.
Yeah.
Right. Said another way, he transforms into the lion, where he is inner masculine, inner feminine, intrinsically integrated. He turns into the bull. Europa followed the bull, and Cadmus then became the bull because he's the masculine serpent now.
Yeah.
Right. And this has like a very subtle message about what it means to be a king as well.
Yeah.
Or a queen, right, in your life and the world, because Harmonia like does it as well.
Yeah.
And so the question of the king is, and Zeus is an example of this. He comes down as the bull to restore the balance of the 4 boys and 1 girl, completely lopsided, inner masculine, inner feminine split.
Yeah.
And the question the king asks is, first of all, what is the matter here? What is the matter in our world? And secondly, then, what is it going to take to restore balance?
Yeah.
And if I need to become the serpent, easy, done. I wish I knew this in the beginning. I didn't. Fine. I slayed the serpent. I don't know that there's a way to make up for it, but I'm begging the gods to basically make me a serpent so that we're at least back to par. And the gods are like, huh, there's an idea. Okay, done. And Harmonia is like, yeah, I'm coming too. So we got 2 now.
Yeah.
So what is imbalanced in the world? What is the matter here? What ails the world? The healing question. And then the follow-on, because it's the king. So it's inner masculine, boundaries, protection, and manifestation. So he also asks the manifestation question. What is it going to take to restore the balance?
Yeah.
Right? And when you get in touch with your bliss, that is basically the question you ask. What is the thing flowing through me that is trying to come through me into the world, into the life of the world around me? Not just my passions, but what is trying to come through me, and what target is it aimed at? Who is it trying to help from my upwelling of emotion, from my empathy? When we teach on bliss, one of the key things is it's not just what you like to do. It is grounded in that. But then who are you trying to help in the world? Right? And the secret connection between healing and bliss is that your bliss is often trying to help the outer reflection of your inner lost board member.
Yeah.
What you're trying to do is you're trying to find outer dragons to help, because you're trying to recover your own inner slain dragon. And the classical sayings that from your deepest wound will come your greatest gift to the world. That's exactly what that means.
Yeah.
Right. So when people say, oh my gosh, who do you think you are, trying to rebalance the world, trying to like do this thing to help people? And for me, it's kind of a toxic patriarchy that we live in. And basically the meaning and purpose of my life is to do work that is in flow with what I love to do, to attempt to restore the power of the sacred, i.e. the feminine, basically, in our world. Right. So we tell stories about serpents. And you know, if there's nothing else you take away from this, like be nice to dragons. Feminines, your little sister Europa, Athena, any feminine you encounter, don't be a jerk. If that's all we take away from man or woman or you know, non-binary listening to this, we've had a banner day. If that's the only thing you take away, fabulous.
Yeah.
And at the king level, this is the difference between inflation and grandiosity. Because one of the main things that will be leveled at you from the lesser minds out there of fear, threat, and control will be like, oh, you think you're so whatever, you're like grandiose or whatever. And the difference between inflation and grandiosity is embodied by Cadmus himself. Inflation, so you plug into the thing that is greater than yourself. Your talent, your bliss, your artistic gifts or whatever, right? And you're at the crossroads between inflation and grandiosity. If you go down the path of inflation, you say, I'm incredible, I'm the king of the world, it's all about me, everyone bow down to me, because I'm plugged into this greater thing, but I'm going to use it to basically tonk you all over the head and make you like worship me. That's inflation. Hubris, all of that comes from that. Grandiosity is different. Grandiosity is, I'm plugged into this thing that is greater than me. And instead of saying that makes me great, I look up the line to what the thing is trying to do in the world. Right? So when you talk to your muse, it's like one thing that many people's muses are trying to do is trying to restore the balance of feminine and masculine, sacred and profane in the world. Because a toxic patriarchy hurts everyone. It hurts men, women, non-binary alike. Right? Just ask any guy who's been raised by a single mom, making 80 cents on the dollar to her male counterpart and having to raise her son alone because the guy left. Right? Patriarchy hurts everybody. And so when you go down the path of grandiosity, you plug into this larger thing and you're like, oh my gosh, how am I going to live my life so that by the time I die my mortal death, we've maybe moved the needle a tiny little bit on this massive, global, epic issue that is plaguing all of humankind. I can live my whole life dedicated to this, and we move the needle a little bit. It's like, that will have been unbelievable. And so the question of grandiosity is not worship me. It's, shit, this is a big fucking problem. What is it going to take? What's it going to take to make a little dent in the universe of this problem? And that is the question Cadmus asks. And his solution is, I'm going to turn myself, I'm not even going to turn I have no power. I'm going to beg the gods to turn me into a serpent. And at least I will just have, if nothing else, cleaned up after myself and my own screw-ups, right? And replace, and of course, the example, the story, everything is like healing. It's like healing for me to hear you talk about it. Hear you, right? The sort of, my feminine editor. Tell the story to me twice, right? And then we share it with everyone, and it's just healing all around. It's just healing all around. So, oh, your sound's off. Your sound's off.
Sorry, I think I muted myself. No, there was a question I wanted to ask, but I think I'll let you complete this thought about, the serpents you had.
Okay. So, so in a way, this pattern that is being traced by the story is what we in our work, right, teach all day long in different forms. The muse thing, creating the life of your dreams, living in the sacred, right? These are all variations of the underlying archetype of this theme, which brings to mind the archetype of the Ouroboros, right? where in the Greek system, the entire world is bounded by this governing archetype of the Ouroboros. What is the Ouroboros? The Ouroboros is the one snake in a circle, cyclical, not linear, that consumes its own tail. So the world lives by feeding off its own self, right? So I live by eating plants and animals, and eventually I die and my body is eaten by the fungi and bacteria, which is then eaten again by the plants and animals. Every life lives off the death of another, right? And that's both tragic and it's also sacred and beautiful. And so in the Greek system, the ultimate Ouroboros is Okeanos. Right? So Okeanos is the name of the gigantic snake that circles the world and bounds
I'm having trouble playing the music from the library.
Alexa, stop. That circles the world and binds it and defines what the world is. And of course, Okeanos, the name of this Ouroboros snake, is the word from which we get the word ocean. It is the one snake that consumes its own tail. Time and nature are intrinsically cyclical and serpentine. The nature of existence is that we consume our own tail. We screw it up, and this is what keeps us living and keeps the circle turning. If Cadmus was not a lopsided masculine, there would be no story. If Cadmus had not slain the dragon, there would be no story. Yeah. My elder daughter is a filmmaker now, but when she was younger and we were watching, movies, she would say, she'd be like, "Dada, I'm scared something bad will happen." And I would be like, "Well, first of all, it's a movie. Everything's going to be all right. But also, if nothing bad happens at all, there's kind of no movie, right?" And if there's no movie, there's no popcorn. So she'd be like, all right. Unpause the movie. Let's keep going. What did you want to say? Tell me. Say.
Yeah. No, there was this question that came up, and I wanted to address that, which is, does it really start with the dragon, or before that, when he sacrificed the cow? And the way it goes in the story is he doesn't actually sacrifice the cow because he never gets to that part. There's so many distractions on the way when he needs water for the ritual, and all of that happens. But so typically it is at the dragon where it starts. But it brought me to a question that I've always wanted to ask you. Is the difference between slaying a dragon, the way it is in the story, where you talk about how he just sent his men and this unconscious act ended up in the whole encounter where he kills the dragon. So the difference between something like this and a ritual conscious sacrifice. Like there is a clear difference, when you unconsciously out of rage kill something, but also, sacrifice an animal is a sacred act.
I think the way I would think about that is that there is a difference between sacrifice and loss. There's a difference between sacrifice and loss. And I mean, we only have 15 minutes, but just when we teach about grief, and I'm getting the signal now that we should probably do a month-long cohort on grief and grieving, and actually what the physics of grieving are and how to do that. It's just come up so many times now. So actually, among this group, if you would be interested in doing a month-long cohort on grief and grieving, shoot me an email and we'll figure out how to do that. There's a lot to say. But just very quickly here, the difference between loss and sacrifice is grief. if you lose something, you lose it. It is only after you grieve it, the full physics of grief, that the grief transforms the loss into a sacrifice. Okay, so, and it is fitting that it is Cadmus who realizes the loss and digests it and grieves it basically in the course of his entire life circumambulation. That in the end, the product of that grieving, the fruit of the grieving, is that he himself becomes the thing he lost.
Yeah.
Right. So in the end, he doesn't lose his human form. He sacrifices it.
Yes.
Because he's fully grieved the full circle of everything he's done and has failed to do. And nobody's punishing. It's not like, okay, your sentence is this, and he goes quietly. He's like, he's fine. He can continue being the king. He leaves and goes on like walkabout, like wanders into the forest, right? And then in the forest, he's grieving. And he realizes this comes back to the dragon, which was a loss. But on reflection and grieving, it becomes the sacrifice. Yeah. And then he mirrors the sacrifice. He sacrifices himself.
Yeah.
And then basically the dragon is restored.
Right.
Right. So, and it makes perfect consistent sense that it would be Cadmus who does this, because Cadmus is a king. And we know from the story, Cadmus is a good king.
Yeah.
And one of the functions of the king is, for me, the three functions of the king are containment, the holding of grief, and the power to bestow blessing.
Yeah.
Right. That's the difference between a warrior and a king. A warrior fights, is all force, and has sustained losses, comrades, whatever. Right. But to become a king is not just the strongest warrior. The king is the warrior who has grieved and turned the losses of warriorship into the sacrifice of kingship.
Yeah.
And it's because of the grief. Grief is what transforms a warrior into a king. And it's because of that grief and power to hold grief and power to provide containment that gives the king, in addition, queen also, it's just masculine and feminine versions of this, that gives the king the power to bestow blessing.
Yeah.
To be able to say and declare this is good, and to have that come with it all of the energetic and transformative powers. So you need a king. I mean, in terms of male initiation, you need a king or an equivalent king-like elder to transform boys into men.
Yeah.
And we don't have a lot of king energy in our very adolescent modern society. So we have a lot of biological men running around, even in their 70s, who are basically boy men. Because they only know loss and slaying dragons. They haven't grieved, because hand in glove with that, in our society, we are terrified of grief. Yeah. Everyone's like, just get on with it. Just move on to the next thing. You got to move on. You got to let go. And it's like, why? Because we're on the arrow of linear time and we don't want to fall behind.
Yes. Yes.
So yeah, thanks. I don't know if I answered your question, but
yes. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Thank you. So also then, what would be the reflection questions for
okay.
the story?
Okay, so the exercise, again, no expectation of participation, only if you want. But take this as a journal prompt, some quiet time. So in this cycle of Cadmus, where are you in this cycle? What is the dragon you have slain in your life, typically in early life? Have you just slain it? Or are you later in the story? Are you almost ready to be a dragon yourself? Right, so that's the question. So where are you in this story in your life? And what do you feel, given the pattern, given the labyrinthine, serpentine pattern of the story, what do you feel like your next step might be? That's it. Oh, you're on mute.
Right. Sorry. Okay.
Yeah, that's okay.
Thank you. Thank you. That feels like a powerful exercise to do. But then we'll get added to the list of interviews and conversations I'm having. Right.
People are like,
So
not to be too linear, but I do have a job. I do have to get back to work at some point.
Tomorrow is Monday.
The kids are asking where their clean clothes are. No laundry's getting done. Nothing's getting done. Well, that's yeah. That's the joy of life.
Yeah.
Too much living to do. Too much living to do.
Yeah. So thank you, Artie. All right.
All right. Thank you. All right. Should we close the session?
Yeah.
All right. So, thanks everyone for being here. Our next session is next month. I'm going to put the sign up link in the chat on Facebook and on Crowdcast. It's free, open to the public. Feel free to join only if you want. And with that, I will go ahead and close our sacred space. So I hereby close this session of our shared sacred space. Thank you for holding this space with me and with us. And thank you for sharing the nourishment, the emotional nourishment and the spiritual nourishment of the shared sacred space with me. I give you my blessing. Go in peace, bestowed with blessing, free of fear, free of threat, and free of the undue control of others. Thank you so much. Have a great day. Have a great week. Have a great month. And I will see you all in the next session. Happy Sunday, everyone. Thank you.